Hi, and welcome to English Channel. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
1. The Spark at the Grand Bazaar. On December 28th, 2025, something important happened in Tehran. The Iranian rial fell to its lowest value in history. People were already struggling with high prices. Now food and basic goods became even more expensive. At the Grand Bazaar, many shop owners made a strong decision. They closed their stores and stopped working. The busy market became quiet. The streets that were once full of people turned empty. This silence sent a powerful message. It showed that people no longer trusted the economy. That day became the spark that started protests across the country. 2. The slow build, a deep economic crisis. At the end of 2025, life became very hard in Iran. The economy was already weak, but now it was breaking. Inflation rose very fast and did not stop. Every week, prices were higher than before. Food, fuel, and medicine cost much more money. Many families could not afford basic needs. At the same time, the country faced serious energy shortages. Electricity cuts became common in many cities. Homes were cold at night and dark during the day. Factories could not work normally. Small businesses lost customers and income. International sanctions also became tighter. Trade with other countries was limited. Foreign money stopped coming into the country. The national currency kept losing value. People saw their savings disappear. Years of poor government management made the situation worse. Leaders gave promises, but people saw no real change. Official speeches sounded empty to ordinary citizens. One shocking number spread quickly among the people. Food prices had increased by 72% in 1 year. This number made people angry and afraid. Parents worried about feeding their children. Elderly people worried about buying medicine. Young workers felt their future was stolen. Taxi drivers, teachers, and factory workers all suffered. Anger grew quietly in homes, shops, and workplaces. People talked in whispers at first. They complained to friends and family. Trust in the government slowly disappeared. This silent anger became the fuel for something bigger. The country was moving toward unrest, step by step. 3. The spread from economic demands to political goals. On December 30th, 2025, the situation changed quickly. Protests did not stay in one place anymore. They spread across the entire country. More than 210 cities joined the demonstrations. All 31 provinces saw people on the streets. What began as economic anger became something deeper. At first, people shouted about food prices and jobs. They asked for fair wages and affordable living costs. Soon, their voices became louder and stronger. The message began to change. People stopped asking only for economic relief. They started asking for political change. New slogans appeared in the crowds. People shouted against corruption and injustice. They blamed the system, not just prices. At universities, students became very active. Young people led marches and rallies. They used clear and brave words. In large public squares, chants echoed loudly. "Down with the dictator" was heard again and again. This slogan showed a major shift. Fear began to fade among the protesters. Crowds grew larger each day. Videos spread quickly on social media. People saw that they were not alone. Workers joined students. Shop owners joined factory laborers. Women and men marched side by side. The protests connected different social groups. The movement now had a shared direction. It was no longer only about money. It was about dignity, voice, and the future. By the end of December, the nation stood at a turning point. What started as economic pain had become a political challenge. The protests were no longer local. They had become a national movement for a call for unity. The role of Reza Pahlavi. On January 6, 2026, a new voice entered the story. That voice was Reza Pahlavi. He is the son of the last Shah of Iran. For many years, he lived outside the country. Some people supported him. Some people did not trust him. But at this moment, many were ready to listen. He released a public message to the people of Iran. In his message, he asked citizens to stand together. He called for nationwide protests on January 8th and January 9th. He spoke about unity. He spoke about freedom. He said the country needed peaceful change. His words spread quickly on social media. People shared his message again and again. For the first time, the protests had a clear date. They also had a common goal. Before this moment, many protests were local and separate. Different cities acted at different times. Different groups had different demands. Now, there was one shared direction. The call created new energy across the country. Students prepared banners. Workers planned strikes. Families discussed whether to join. The idea of a secular democratic system became a central theme. People began to talk not only about prices, but about the future of the nation. The movement felt more organized. It felt stronger. On the nights of January 7th, many people could not sleep. They waited for the next day. They knew something important was coming. Hope and fear lived side by side in their hearts. January 8th was no longer just another day. It was becoming a symbol of unity. 5. The peak and the digital darkness. On January 8th, 2026, millions of people went into the streets. Cities across the country were filled with crowds. From small towns to large capitals, people marched together. The atmosphere was tense but powerful. Voices rose in unison. Chants echoed through universities and public squares. The protests reached their highest point that evening. Then, at exactly 8 p.m., something sudden happened. The internet stopped working. Mobile networks also failed. Messages could not be sent. Calls could not be made. Social media pages stopped updating. The country went silent online. The government had ordered a near-total shutdown. It was one of the largest communication blackouts in the nation's history. People could not contact family members in other cities. Journalists could not send reports to the outside world. Videos of the protests stopped appearing. Fear quickly spread among the crowds. Many understood what this meant. Without cameras and online attention, Security forces could act more freely. There were also reports about interference with satellite systems, such as Starlink. Signals became weak or disappeared completely. The country felt cut off from the world. It was a digital darkness. Inside this silence, tension grew stronger. Protesters did not know what was happening in other cities. Rumors moved from person to person. Some said the army was coming. Others said arrests had already begun. The blackout created confusion and isolation. Families waited anxiously at home. They could not reach loved ones in the streets. The night felt long and heavy. The sound of chanting slowly mixed with the sound of sirens. The peak of unity was now entering a dangerous stage. The country stood in darkness, unsure of what would happen next. 6. Silent massacres in the darkness. From January 8th to January 10th, 2026, the country was still in digital darkness. The internet was cut. Phone networks were blocked. People could not share videos or send messages to the outside world. During this silence, the situation became much more violent. Security forces received new orders. They were told to stop the protests at any cost. In many cities, they began to shoot directly at protesters. Crowds that were chanting only hours before now faced live bullets. Panic spread quickly. People ran in different directions. Some tried to help the wounded. Others searched for missing friends and family members. Reports later spoke about terrible scenes. In Fardis, witnesses said gunfire lasted for hours. In Rasht, security forces surrounded main streets and opened fire. Hospitals became full very quickly. Doctors and nurses worked without rest. Medical supplies began to run out. In Tehran, some hospitals were guarded by armed officers. Witnesses later reported seeing many bodies inside hospital buildings. Some said they saw rows of covered bodies in corridors. Families waited outside, desperate for news. Many could not find their loved ones. Because the internet was still down, the world saw almost nothing. There were no live videos. There were no official numbers. Information moved slowly, mostly by word of mouth. Fear spread across the country. People understood that the protests had entered a very dangerous phase. The silence of the blackout hid the scale of the violence. But inside the country, people knew something terrible had happened. The cost of protest was now measured in lives. 7. International reaction and external pressure. When the internet slowly returned, shocking reports began to appear. Images and testimonies reached the outside world. Governments and human rights groups reacted quickly. The international community strongly condemned the use of force. The United States spoke out against the violence. The European Union also released official statements. They called for an immediate stop to the shootings. New sanctions were placed on members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. These sanctions targeted leaders and financial networks. The goal was to increase pressure on the government. At that time, U.S. President Donald Trump made a strong warning. He said Iran would face serious consequences if the killing continued. His words increased global attention on the crisis. Meanwhile, international human rights organizations began investigations. They collected witness statements and medical reports. Some groups spoke about possible crimes against humanity. They demanded independent investigations. Protests also appeared outside Iranian embassies in several countries. Exiled Iranians held candles and photos of victims. They asked the world not to forget what happened. Global media covered the story every day. Pressure from outside the country continued to grow. Inside Iran, however, the situation remained tense. The government denied many accusations. Officials said they were protecting national security, but the gap between the government's words and people's experiences became wider. The crisis was no longer only national. It had become an international issue. The world was now watching closely. 8. Unofficial martial law and maximum crackdown. From January 15th to January 21st, 2026, daily life changed again in Iran. The government did not officially announce martial law, but in reality, the country felt like it was under military rule. A nationwide curfew was enforced at night. People were told to stay inside their homes. Streets became empty after sunset. Tanks and armored vehicles were seen in major cities. Security forces set up checkpoints on many roads. Cars were stopped and searched. Young men were questioned for hours. At the same time, large arrest operations began. Security officers went from house to house. They knocked on doors in the middle of the night. Some people were taken away without explanation. Families did not know where their loved ones were sent. Lawyers often could not reach their clients. By the end of that week, reports said more than 50,000 people had been arrested. Prisons quickly became overcrowded. Soon, disturbing stories started to leak out. Former detainees spoke about harsh treatment. There were reports of beatings and torture. Some also reported sexual violence inside detention centers. These stories spread quietly at first, but fear grew across society. The message from the government was clear. Any resistance would be punished. The crackdown was meant to break the spirit of the movement. For a moment, it seemed to work. By the end of January, officials declared that the riots were over. The streets looked calm again, but under the surface, anger was still alive. 9. The second wave. The rise of the young generation. On February 21st, 2026, the silence ended. A new wave of protests began. This time, students were at the front. University campuses became centers of activity. Young people organized marches and gatherings. They used simple signs and strong words. High school students also joined. In several cities, teenagers walked together through the streets. They did not carry weapons. They carried photos of those who had died in January. The date was important. It marked 40 days since the first major killings. In Iranian tradition, the 40th day after a death is a time of remembrance. Memorial ceremonies were held in homes and public spaces. These gatherings slowly turned into protests. The new generation, often called Generation Z, showed courage. They had grown up with the internet and social media. They knew how to share information quickly. They were not easily silenced. Even after arrests and threats, they returned to the streets. Their message was clear. The movement was not finished. The government had tried to end the protests, but the spirit of resistance was still strong. A new chapter was beginning, led by the youth of the nation. 10. A historic turning point. Airstrikes and the fall of a leader. On February 28, 2026, the crisis reached a dramatic turning point. In the early hours of the morning, coordinated airstrikes hit several locations in Iran. The attacks were carried out by the United States and Israel. Military bases and nuclear facilities were the main targets. Explosions were reported near important strategic sites. Smoke rose into the sky in different regions. State television confirmed damage, but gave few details. The government called the attacks an act of aggression. People across the country felt shock and fear. Some worried about a larger war. Others believed this moment would change everything. In the middle of this chaos, unexpected news spread quickly. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, had died. Official sources first gave limited information. Later, state media confirmed his death. He had ruled the country for more than 3 decades. For many citizens, he was the symbol of the system. His death marked the end of an era. Supporters mourned him publicly. Opponents saw the moment as historic change. The country stood at a crossroads. Leadership structures suddenly became unclear. Who would take control next? Would the system survive without its central figure? Confusion filled both political circles and ordinary homes. This was not only a military event, it was a political earthquake. Iran was entering unknown territory. 11. A power vacuum and an interim government. After the death of Khamenei, a power vacuum appeared. Different groups moved quickly. Senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps tried to secure key institutions. They increased security around government buildings. At the same time, opposition groups saw a rare opportunity. The National Council of Resistance of Iran announced an important statement. They declared the formation of a temporary government. Their goal was to prepare the country for free elections. They promised a democratic and secular system. They spoke about human rights and the rule of law. Many citizens listened carefully. Some felt hopeful for the first time in months. Others feared more instability. Inside the country, tensions remained high. Different factions within the IRGC disagreed about the future. Political elites tried to protect their influence. Meanwhile, protesters demanded real change, not only new faces. The streets were calmer, but uncertainty was everywhere. Iran stood between 2 paths. One path led to continued military control. The other path led to democratic reform. The outcome was not yet clear, but one thing was certain. The old order had been shaken deeply. 12. The lesson. The price of freedom and the power of persistence. The protests of 2025 to 2026 left a deep mark on history. They showed how economic pain can grow into political demand. They showed how fear can turn into courage. Extreme force may control streets for a time. It may silence voices for a moment, but it cannot erase the desire for freedom. Even after arrests and violence, people returned to the streets. Young students carried the movement forward. Families remembered those who lost their lives. The fall of a long-standing leader proved something important. A system built mainly on repression is fragile. True stability does not come from fear. It comes from trust. A nation becomes strong when citizens are heard. Basic rights must be protected. The right to live, the right to speak, the right to choose leaders freely. The story of these protests is not only about conflict, it is about persistence. It is about ordinary people who refuse to give up. History will remember the cost they paid, and it will remember their courage.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.